Welcome to the Petro Papers podcast. Say that 10 times fast. This is where you get your oil and gas intellectual stimulation by asking the technical questions. I'm Yoga Sripradan, and with me here today, I have Josh Heft from CANUSA. He's a project manager, and I guess he's speaking really early in the morning today because it's bright and early. And at the time of this recording, it's around 8 a.m. So I guess we're both early birds. But today we're going to talk a little bit about some of the work that he's doing at CANUSA, how he got into engineering, and he's going to give his insight on what are the trends he sees, what advice he can give to young professionals. So this will definitely benefit us as viewers and listeners. Welcome to the podcast, Josh.
Thanks, Josh. I'm glad to be here. Excited to get chatting.
Awesome. So I asked this question to everyone, all my guests. Josh, how'd you get here? Can you talk about your path of what inspired you to get into engineering, what inspired you to get into oil and gas, and where you are today?
Yeah, definitely. I went to school at Georgia Tech. I kind of started without knowing what discipline of engineering I wanted to do, but I knew I wanted to do engineering. Um, I fell in love with electrical engineering, so that's actually my background. You guys probably don't get too many electrical engineers on the oil and gas podcast, probably heavy chemical and process. Um, but yeah, so I had one of my co-ops was with Marathon Petroleum at a refinery in Louisiana, and I was in the maintenance reliability group there, and so I was out in the plant a lot. And when you're in a refinery setting, you just kind of fall in love with the complexity of what you have going on around you, and just all the operations that are going on. And so that really piqued my interest in the oil and gas industry, and went into refining, and then a few years ago switched away from Marathon and joined CANUSA EPC. Uh, Wanted to join a consulting firm to kind of broaden my horizons into sort of the business side of things, and a lot of the all the companies and organizations that go in to actually support the oil and gas industry. And so I've gotten a lot of enjoyment out of being in a role like I'm in now, kind of in supporting the operators rather than being an operator.
Awesome. Isn't it amazing how you started off thinking that you'll have one particular path and then one thing leads to another, and now you're in the oil and gas industry, and now you're surrounded by petroleum and chemical engineers, being the lone electrical engineer. So that's interesting.
Yeah, I feel like every day you got to come to work and impress the process engineers.
That's really funny. We, it every subdiscipline in petroleum engineering kind of has their own turf war between one versus the other. Like a reservoir engineer would make fun of the geologist or make fun of the production engineer, and then drilling engineer makes fun of everyone else. So, yeah, I can totally understand where you're coming from. I was thinking about. I wanted to get a little bit in a deeper dive into what kind of projects is CANUSA EPC uh, hitting up, and what's been your role so far in the organization?
Yeah, so I support a little bit of business development, and by growing some of our key accounts, key operators. One of them is actually Marathon, so that kind of falls in well with the Marathon background there. But uh, specifically, what I wanted to share with you today was some of the program work that we've been engaged with, specifically to address Quad OB driven compliance projects. Um, Quad OB is kind of prevalent for everyone in at least mostly upstream and midstream natural gas facilities. But we're seeing a lot of impact to operators everywhere, and a lot more uh, requests coming in for some just engineering, some EPC contracts and support to meet those emission reduction compliance requirements.
Awesome. Well, I know that my husband, for example, well, he's now a drilling engineer, but he worked in the facility space, and he always talked about Quad OB and emissions reductions, and it gets thrown around a lot. For viewers and listeners, what is Quad OB and why is that important in the oil and gas industry?
Sure. So Quad O B or the whole Quad O. initiative. There's different subparts, Quad OA, Quad OB, Quad OC. I'm going to speak specifically to Quad OB, but the whole idea is it's a regulation initiated by the EPA, and it impacts natural gas facilities primarily to target methane and VOC emissions. So it's all aimed at reducing methane and VOC emissions. And specifically for natural gas facilities. And then it kind of goes into a wide range of different equipment and like point sources that they'd like to see either being captured or emissions just being reduced overall. Um, and so that's really what drives a lot of the projects that we're seeing is a lot of those subparts in Quad OB that is asking to address some of those equipment emissions.
That is really interesting, and I'm glad you explained that because it sounds like it's really important for us to keep tabs in the industry, especially since there's compliance that's in there. So I'm curious to know what do you think makes a project successful in execution for emissions reduction projects?
Sure. So often in your upstream in natural gas and midstream natural gas facilities, there's numerous dozens of these facilities all supporting a single gathering and processing system. And so when these were initially built, a lot of them were just kind of venting natural gas, whether it's from your tanks or rod packing in your compressors or whatever it may be. And so we've seen that having a programmed approach to address multiple sites in one go has been the most effective for kind of reducing those compliance costs and accelerating the schedule that kind of Quad OB is mandating here. And I think in addition to that, what the benefits of approaching this in a programmed uh, philosophy are you can engage vendors, contractors, EPC firms, operators kind of early on and develop a game plan for all of your facilities. And so engaging vendors, for example, if you are putting in an instrument air package or an instrument air system to replace your instrument gas system, there's a big difference in negotiating the contract there compared to if you're only executing a single facility or if you're executing 20 facilities, the pricing agreement's going to look very, very different. And there's going to be probably increased quality in that product on the back end because they're producing, 20 of the same unit. Um, and so that those benefits can be seen through contractor engagement and also EPC firm engagement. Like the more you're executing these projects, kind of the more efficient and better that you're going to complete them.
Awesome. It definitely takes reps. Like I know we were talking offline, but it definitely takes that repetition or it takes that consistency like we do whenever we are working out at CrossFit together. I know you do
Mm.
a bunch of Ironmans too, so yeah, that is I just wanted to make that connection.
The more you can do something repetitively, the better you get at it, right? Especially like for CrossFit and Ironman, the body wants to use as little energy as possible, and it usually figures out a way to do that.
And then as engineers, we try to get more efficient or we try to get more productive, more efficient. We try to get faster. That way
Absolutely.
it takes less effort after each subsequent rep. Yeah. So awesome. Well, there's more that I still wanted to talk to you about relating to emissions reductions. And I just really wanted to know how do you see oil and gas facility design changing in the future due to Quad OB and due to these regulations and knowing what are the metrics of success for these kinds of projects?
Sure. So part of the requirements of Quad OB is that all of the new facilities, well, either new or modified, post 2022, so this is already happening, are required to be compliant with the different subparts in there pertaining to emissions reduction for various equipment. So What we're already seeing is, a greenfield compressor station, for example, is from inception is utilizing an instrument air system instead of an instrument gas system. So that's impacting or that's reducing emissions to 100% reduction in all of your pneumatic users. So think controllers, pneumatic pumps, what have you. And then also switching from start gas to start air for your compressors. All that's coming from the beginning. In addition to tank venting, whereas ordinarily maybe they're they're just venting to atmosphere. They're putting in an emissions control device and capturing all that and piping up to their combustor. Or some states are even taking this a step further, which is a little bit Quad OC related, but I won't touch too much on that. But New Mexico, for example, is requiring that a combustor isn't enough. They want you to utilize a VRU as much as possible so that they can, re-inject that back into the inlet of the station, as opposed to just constantly combusting, which is better than venting, but VRU kind of takes that a step further. And so we're seeing a lot more of that in the greenfield construction. And so that just adds um, another bit of complexity to your build out.
Interesting. I know it's all meant for producing sustainable and safe barrels for sure. It always amazes me how the landscape, the policy landscape, regulatory landscape, the just what we need to do is as far as executing these projects successfully at all different angles, how that's also influenced by the landscape and by the relationships we have with our regulatory bodies. So that'll be interesting to see that evolution of the facility design and based on those constant conversations that we have with our state and national part or federal partners. So
Sure.
yeah, that's yeah, I can't wait. You know, what's funny is that I would hear my husband talk about facilities engineering, and it would just go above my head with emissions reduction. I do feel like this conversation is helping me learn a little bit more about what exactly he talks about on a
Mhm.
day-to-day basis when he talks shop. So much appreciated. Well, you know, I did want to leave some with our viewers and listeners with something inspirational. Well, what educational background and skills are required for someone looking to enter in the field of consulting or to enter in what you're doing today? Because you know there's a lot of volatility happening in the industry right now, and you and I work on different ends of the industry to some extent. I do a lot more subsurface, you do a lot of surface work. But from your perspective, what are some skills that our viewers and listeners may need in order to get into to to what you're doing today?
Yeah, that's a good question. Specifically on the consulting side, I would say that a huge advantage that consultants can have is having prior operator experience. And so when you've kind of been on that side of the fence and you hear the conversations and the directives of that particular client or operator, you start to really understand how and why they want to leverage using consultants, and sort of the business driver behind the projects that they're doing. And you kind of have the perspective of what is this project manager, what is this operator going to find important? Because, oftentimes they're not talking about the bigger picture of why they're doing a project or who's looking over their shoulder or how important it is up on their capital projects chain. And so having that prior experience is super beneficial when you're a consultant. In addition to that, I mean, the field work and the field experience that you get on the operator side is invaluable. So, the difference between starting out at an operator and maybe starting out at a consulting firm is, at a consulting firm, you're going to the field a lot less often than if you're, an active facilities engineer where you're going out to sites, for a week at a time every month, or in my case, I was sitting inside the refinery fence line. So it's every single day you're kind of out there looking at things, and you're fully immersed in the equipment and the processes, as well as people, especially operators who have been at that facility for 30 or 40 years. And they can give you really, really good insight into what they've seen and how they want things to be done. Um, so I think that that's always a good approach is, trying to get operator experience before switching over to consulting. That's not to say that you can't start out in consulting, but if you are starting out in consulting, if you have any opportunity to go to the field or support maybe like a large commissioning effort, that's really where it's going to help you develop past your peers who might just be staying in the office a little more.
That is wonderful advice. I have spent several episodes, whether if it's a podcast episode or on YouTube, talking about how important it is to get that field exposure.
Mhm.
So having another testament to that is so helpful. Thank you so much for sharing that.
Yeah, definitely.
And then, I know I've peppered you with so many questions, Josh. I just want to ask you one more question before I let you go. Looking ahead, what do you see as some of the biggest opportunities and challenges for project engineers in the oil and gas industry?
Yeah, so some of the biggest opportunities, I mean, with the current position on oil and gas in the United States, I mean, there's an abundancy of opportunity for new capital projects coming in. I mean, we're building massive LNG export facilities. We're building miles and miles of pipelines to support some of these exporting facilities. We're ramping up further exploration in different basins. And the opportunity for young engineers to help be a part of that next iteration of capital development for oil and gas in the United States is there for the taking. And so being a part of that growth is something that a lot of young project engineers can be a part of, and they should be asking like, "Hey, what projects are you guys working on? Are you guys being involved in any of these LNG projects? Are you involved in the new well drilling and new pipelines, and see where they can contribute and learn from some of that stuff going on?"
Awesome. Josh, it was wonderful having you on the podcast. I learned so much about just the emissions reduction efforts, the projects that you've been involved in, how facilities can evolve over time after interfacing with different regulatory bodies, and how we learn a lot more about how emissions can be measured and tracked. So this was a very, very eye-opening conversation we had today.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks so much for having me on. I always like chatting about project management and what we have going on in oil and gas. So I really appreciate you having me on.
Perfect. Well, folks, that is the Petro Papers podcast episode for today. Feel free to reach out to Josh or Canusa, and I'll put all that contact information below in the description box on YouTube and on Apple Podcasts. This is Yoga Shri Pradhan. If you can't pronounce that, this is Yoshi Pradhan, and I'm signing off.